Well, hey everyone, thanks for coming. Looking forward to this discussion. We have three of the largest operators up here, and given that within restaking, I feel like operators are kind of one of the least talked about players in the space, but in my perspective, one of the most exciting. So really excited for this chat. To the three panelists, please introduce yourselves and maybe give some background on kind of how you guys got to this point running operators, some history of your teams, and yeah.
Yep, sure, so I'll take it away. I'm Michael. I'm head of research at Course One. We've been around for a while, specifically since 2017. And we kind of were early to a lot of trends, right? So we were like a testnet validator for Solana. We've been on Ethereum for a while too. Our main differentiator, I would say, is around research. I'm head of research. So we've published a few studies that found a good audience, right? Something around MEV management on DYDX4. A more recent example is artificial latency timing games on Ethereum. And we also published an EigenLayer risk framework for AWS basket risk. So I'm happy to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Yeah, my name is John Park. I run a validator company called A41. I'm a BD founder, so I'm not as fancy as Michael in terms of like head of research. But I think we're a little bit different from Course One. I mean, we do excel in research, and we provide a lot of language support, and like we do publish a lot of Korean articles for the Korean audience usually. I mean, it's not really targeted, or it's not primarily targeting the retails, but we still do target like a lot of the retails, and also a lot of the industry players, because language hurdle is actually like a huge hurdle in the region. So like APAC, when you think about it, it's more about like, it's a retail heavy market, but at the same time, the language itself is being a hurdle for delivering a lot of the trendy topics and trending issues. So we are trying to take that as a charge, and then try to become a relayer for that. The reason why we started A41 was that when we first started, we were just a research firm, just because of the opinion leadership vacancy, and also as I said, there were not that much information that were being dispersed in the region. So we started off a research firm, but then we decided that why don't we actually do a validator, because my background was also a head of BD at another validator company. So we pivoted in 2022 May, and starting from October when we closed our seed round, that's when we started to actually pedal ourselves into the scene. We were lucky and fortunate enough to actually be in the same stage with all these giants, but I think we're growing. We're one of the largest validators in the APAC region, and we're welcoming any partners who are trying to tap into the Korean market or Asia Pacific market. We support as a validator, but at the same time, we do have a subsidiary that focuses on the GTM advisory. So that's what we do at A41 and why we chose validator.
And I'm Sebastien Rannou. I'm a principal engineer at Kiln, mainly focusing on Ethereum. So I do quite some research, for instance, on consensus client diversity, and also a bit on timing games as well. So Kiln is operating on multiple blockchains, but we have about 4.5% of the Ethereum network. So that's around 50,000 validators. And so obviously, when restaking came out, we were interested to go in that area as well, and yeah, that's why we are here today.
Awesome. Well, getting into some of the questions, I think kicking things off, it'd be helpful to kind of hear all of your thoughts on just, as an operator, what do you think is your primary responsibility?
Should I start?
Yeah, go for it.
I guess first responsibility is to not get slashed. So this implies to understand the slashing risk behind running a specific AVS. So today it's quite easy because there is no slashing, so basically there is no risk. But when this will come, I think our main job will be to understand the risk model and based on it adjust our operations, or select AVSs with a more tech diligence, I would say.
Should I go next?
Go for it.
I mean, it's kind of obvious for us, but network participation, security, and I think one of the most primary responsibilities that we want to emphasize as an APAC player is more about the communication side, if internally and externally. Internally, what I mean by that is with relevant parties, we want to keep the communications within like within an hour, like within a half an hour. When per se, like if the Lido team or like Mantle team like ask us to do like, hey, this is a patch, there's like a bug, or this is what's gonna happen, like then we have to react within like half an hour. So as an internal communications, I think we have to, that's our primary responsibility, always be communicative with relevant parties. External communication-wise, I think it's about educating a lot of the retails and also the institutions about the staking and the liquid staking part. Also, like with the liquid restaking coming in, we have to be also a communicator for that too. But I feel like that's one of the primary responsibilities that we are focusing on as A41.
Yeah, so I agree with what's been said so far. The number one priority is security. And then if we put it in the EigenLayer context, I think that's around mitigating three risks. Risk number one is the AVS risk, right? So we do things like look at the source code, maybe more on that later. Risk number two is our idiosyncratic node operator risk. So we need to understand the type of infrastructure that we run and make sure that we are not subject to some kind of slashing condition, right? Nothing should go wrong. And then the third risk for EigenLayer specifically is if you run a bunch of AVSs, what is the basket risk to that, right? I mean, it's not a linear combination of risk. It's a basket optimization, kind of what you would do with a portfolio in TradFi. So that's our third risk factor that we try to mitigate in the EigenLayer context.
Awesome. So a lot of this seems to be surrounding slashing, and you guys are kind of on the front lines of making sure that people don't get slashed. So how do you do that? How do you make sure that slashing doesn't happen? And maybe John, you can kick us off.
I mean, like, depends, right? If we're talking about L1 level, like, I think it's about, like, how fast you can, like, react when there's, like, there's an event that we're missing the blocks, or, like, if our cluster is down, like, you know, we have to be very, very fast in terms of, or prompt in terms of responding to that. When it comes to AVS slashing, I think, you know, there is no slashing yet that's implemented, but I think we're trying to like prepare like beforehand, like, you know, what are the areas we're gonna look at as our alerting systems, and like also like key management system wise, and all these like the same usual like security setups and parameters that we implement in the other L1s too. But I think we're more like, because we don't know what's gonna be there, I guess we're like attentive to what other operators are doing. Like we tend to like, you know, ask a lot of questions too. Like, so this is our parameter, this is what we're looking at, what you guys are thinking, like, so I guess it's a lot more, again, going back to or revisiting the communications part. I think it's about like communications with other validators.
Yeah, I guess there are like three kinds of penalties that happen today on blockchains. Like, not on AVSs, but on L1s or L2s. Like, you have like liveness slashes, like on some of them, where, for instance, if you are down for a certain amount of hours, you will be slashed. So for this, I guess the strategy is more like to have multiple instances and be like quite like ready to move to another place. So it's quite like it's quite common infrastructure redundancy. Then you have like penalty faults, where like you are basically, the most common example is double signing, and this is a bit in contradiction with the previous risk. Because like if you run in multiple locations, you take the risk to sign from multiple locations, and so, but like these kind of things can be like prevented technically with like doppelganger or like anti-slashing databases or like remote signers, this kind of stuff. So I think it's quite understood. And I would say like the third category is more like data availability ones, and I think this is quite new, and this will come on AVSs. It's like, well, basically make sure that you have the data available whenever you are, well, queried. And this requires different strategies that I don't think have a lot in place in L1s or L2s today, like probably using read element encoding and spreading chunks of data in multiple locations, and be sure that statistically we still have like good chances to find the data in one of the locations we put the data in. So yeah, I would say that would be like the...
Yeah, I think if I come at this, so I agree with everything that's been said, right? I think robust practices are very important. If I come at this from a more general angle, I think, you know, for AVSs, there's no slashing yet, as John mentioned, but there will be. And AVSs can do very different things. And one advantage we do have is that we run almost 60 chains, right? And we've been doing that for a while. And these chains do many different things, right? Some of them quite unusual, right? Like decentralized compute, whatever. So we have experience with setting up non-standard infrastructure where we were to come in and Ethereum were your bread and butter and you would do EigenLayer and maybe Symbiotic because it's adjacent to that, this would be a lot harder. So I think for us, a lot is transferring experience from a large set of chains, specifically into the EigenLayer context. And I also want to highlight one thing that John said before around response time. So I think this is super important. We had a model, a risk model internally where we looked at different parameters and what would scale a risk the most, and really response time is one thing that's very important to minimize, right?
Gotcha.
Can I add one more?
Yeah, go for it.
As an APEC player, like if there are any like here, and I know we're being recorded, so if you're watching this and if you're trying to create an AVS, please do take into account the fact that like APEC players are dying because of the response time. So most of the things are centered around like Western time. So our DevOps always have to wake up at like 3, 4 a.m. when their alert goes off. Like for these guys, it's the daytime. For us, it's like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. But so that's why we have created a regional office in New York, and we're probably going to do one in Lisbon as well. But I think it's one of the factors that a lot of the, like even L1s, and I mean, with the AVSs, there will be a lot of AVSs coming out, but a lot of it is centered around Western time, like Western as in like European time or like US time. So it's also like a pain point that like if there is any founder that could take into account, it would be really appreciated.
Got it. So what I'm hearing is A41 is a nocturnal company.
Oh, yeah.
Nice. So I think you all mentioned that you have experience running different L1 validators and nodes. Could you comment on how, as you've gotten into EigenLayer, how that has informed and been similar to running AVSs, and maybe how it's been different as well? Maybe Michael, you can kick this one off.
Yeah, sure. So I think one important point of framing here is that for many AVSs, it's still very early. Typically, when you run on L1, there's a process that starts with a testnet V1. Right? Maybe then there's a testnet V2. It's an abstract process, but typically something like that would happen, right? And then at some point you hit mainnet, whereas the experience we've made with AVSs is that the go-to-market tends to be a lot faster, right? So this is one difference, and I think one major reason for that is that, no bootstrapping capital, right? So you can be quicker to deploy. Then I think another thing on the business side of things that's quite impactful is right now AVSs are mostly a cost center, right? The revenue really isn't there yet. We are happy to support it. It's an investment. But of course, when you are on a new L1, you make revenue from day one, right? And often the dynamics are such that your revenue is actually quite high when the chain just launches because of like this high VDV, low float meme, whatever, right? Things like that. So I would say it's definitely more important to get up and running quickly. And then I think it's important to see these things as an investment for the future and not go for shortcuts, even though it is maybe mainly a cost center at this point in time.
Yeah, quite the same feedback. Like the maturity of AVSs is like very far away from what's happening on different blockchains. There is a lack of documentation or industry standards. So I guess on the operator side, we need to engage a bit there as well to help go in the right direction. But yeah, so far it's like it's like early DevNet stage where we spin up nodes and documentation is not up to date, so we have to go in the code, try to figure out what's wrong, and it's a bit like So on the other hand, I think the onboarding of AVSs is quite. There's also a sort of framework in place where they all follow the same patterns. So I guess with some time it's going to be a bit like with the Cosmos ecosystem where you kind of replicate the same setup, let's say, and be able to industrialize it even if it's going in different directions.
I think Michael and Sebastien basically covered everything, but if I may add, I think revisiting what Mike said, I think a lot of the AVSs are right now are not at the, it's kind of difficult to say, but not at the mature enough level for the operators. So it's quite easy to actually spin up a node for them. Some of them even have less lines of codes than we expected. So it was a very easy job, but at the same time, like, it kind of scares you, right? So I would say compared to L1s, the only difference is that the easiness of it. But I guess that also there is a difference is that a lot of the AVSs are actually using Docker. So like, you know, we're using Kubernetes, like at A41 to, like, you know, set up a node. For L1s though, like, you know, there is a choice. Either you go AWS or either you go like you with your own bare metal service. I guess you have more choices in terms of how you set up the infrastructure. And from the infra service provider's perspective, I think it has to do with cost too, right? Because there is no like reward yet for the AVSs as compared to like L1s. I guess like it's natural for you to actually pay more attention to the ones that are actually generating a lot of money, even though, yeah, future-wise, AVS is going to rule the world, yada yada, but you know, it's not giving us any money yet. So I may look like too much of a capitalist, but like, you know, from our point of view, it makes more natural for us to pay more attention to L1s. So that's the difference that we see, like between those two. Similarity-wise, I think a lot of the setups are pretty similar, and you know, so.
Gotcha. Yeah, luckily I heard AWS was going to be accepting points as payments, so I think you guys will be covered on your costs soon. Getting into that though, you were kind of mentioning some of the AVSs and variability. How much variability have you guys seen as you've begun running some of these AVSs in terms of the upkeep and the onboarding of each of these? And maybe, Sebastien, we can kick off with you.
So how much yeah, well, like it's quite hard to say right now because there is not a lot of traffic on them. So I guess the variability will really hit it when there will be like massive adoption, if there is. And so yeah, right now I would say it's quite similar, like to spin up AVS X or Y or Z. There are some differences, but it's not like drastic differences. But I expect that, I don't know, if there are like if there's like I don't know, terabytes of data to store on some and like some high CPU on others that are doing computations and so on, then like we'll really like see the differences. But right now it's not the case because there is like yeah, no real usage, I would say.
And Michael?
Yeah, so I agree with this, right? Maybe one thing to add to the question of variability broadly is one thing we've seen a lot of variability in is definitely quality.
Yes.
I'll say it. So some of these AVSs are, you know, they're not particularly inspiring if you dig into the code, right? I mean, you have like an initial commit with the huge thing behind it, and then there's like still comments left in the code that is not ready for production, right? I mean, I think we've seen a fair amount of things on this side, and I think therefore a good screening process is also important, right? But then as far as AVS functionality goes, it's of course extremely broad, right? But I think at this point it's still not as explored as it would be.
I don't know how frank I could go.
I think Michael went pretty frank, so.
I guess we were talking about the same thing as the same different questions, but I do agree with Sebastien on the fact that a lot of the AVSs are pretty similar, and also the variety of AVS actually comes down to like quality of them at the moment. But if I add one more thing, I think though, okay, so since EigenLayer has come in, we have been told by almighty LRTs to onboard all AVSs. So, is it okay? I'm just checking with my PR. Yeah. So with that, we've been engaging with most or not, if not all, of AVSs. The variety that I am seeing as the first person to engage with a lot of the AVSs, along with our head of BD, is that how you engage operators is a very different quality that we're seeing. What I mean by that is some of the AVSs take it as granted that operators at the quality level like Kiln or Course One to onboard them like because we have to, right? We're doing it because we're like trying to step up with like all these LRT policies and stuff like that, or EigenLayer policy, I would say. I mean, there is no policy, but like we have to do it, like because everybody's doing it. But some of the AVSs take it for granted. Others are a little different in terms of like how they treat operators, how they try to listen to operators and their opinions as well. I think it kind of goes along with the same quality that we've seen in terms of like the line of the code or like the comments that are left in the codes as well. So I guess that's the quality, the variety that we're seeing out of the AVSs.
And since you guys are, I guess, engaging on the front line, like, how does this quality come through from your side? Is it increased onboarding time? Is it increased amount of upkeep, or just a lack of comfort and the slashing risk you might be exposed to?
So I think for us, if the quality is really bad, it's an extreme decrease in onboarding time to 0. Because we're not going to onboard it, right? I mean, so there's a fair amount of AVSs that we didn't onboard because we feel like there's some core concerns, right? Maybe something around key management, right? If that's unclear, we don't do it. We have another criterion where if something is close to us, we also don't onboard it. And then, you know, there's of course like different shades of it. If something is just early and it's not as optimized as it would be, which is also the case with some of these, yeah, I mean, we onboard it, we give feedback to the team, and then we would hope for improvement. And if that doesn't happen, you know, we would be willing to offboard things as well.
I guess we're pretty much the same. I mean, like, I guess all the operators, like Kiln and Course One, they're at the top level. We're the ones who are trying to chase them from behind. But I guess we're all like, you know, in terms of infrastructure level, in terms of how we see the projects or how we think in terms of framework, I think we're all pretty much similar, probably. But I wouldn't go extreme as like 0 in terms of onboarding time. But I guess we're on the passive side as an operator. I guess at least until now. I don't know how things will kind of steer up with like Symbiotic coming into the scene. But for now, like I think we're trying to like, you know, give feedback, just like Michael said, give feedback to the team, try to see how they respond to that. We try to give extensive feedback, like when they first come to us for onboarding. But then like if that is not well received or if we don't see anything that's happening, we definitely do have a checklist on our own that if we don't have to go all AVS, we're going to be getting rid of them out of our list of onboarding. So like when the slashing implementation comes in, when we see like all the LRTs like choosing like different selection of the buckets of the AVSs, I think like we know who to get rid of and who to stick with, at least internally. I wouldn't say that we're big enough like Course One to just go 0 yet, but I guess that's the way we approach it.
Yeah, on our side, like we are also like taking like for now because like, there is no risk like onboarding a lot of them. But like there are very simple things to make it better. I think like just like for an AVS to have like proper release mechanism with like versioning, like release notes, and like maybe some documentation and all. And just even this is not present today. So I think like yeah, as a checklist, I would put like these kind of items like versioning, like making sure it's packaged as a Docker and we've seen some crazy stuff where, yeah, like folks would like overwrite tags, like to change the code under the hood without us knowing this kind of stuff. So there are some red flags, but like because it's not yet production ready, I think it's, yeah, we're not down to 0 either. But the list will probably like go down with time. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, Sebastien, we're going to come back to you for this question, but so some of you have been running operators for some of the largest LRTs, and you all have individual operators as well. I guess, how are you kind of approaching this market where you have individual allocation as well as LRT allocation? How are you guys positioning yourselves, and I guess why, and how do you see that going forward? And Sebastien, you can kick things off if you'd like.
So sorry, like so, like how do we see like yeah? Can I like always do we see like a difference between LSTs and LRTs?
Or LRTs, yeah. So it's like you're running an operator specifically for an LRT, or you're running an individual one that's just like the Kiln operator. I guess how are you kind of approaching those two different?
At this stage, I don't have a clear answer on this. I guess the future will tell like on which side it goes. Yeah. A bit dodging the question, I don't have the answer.
Okay. What's the question again? Oh, sorry, I didn't understand.
Oh, yeah, no, sorry, I don't have the answer to this. Yeah, no, yeah, maybe you want to take it.
John, maybe you can go for it.
Sorry.
Should I be conservative as Kiln? I think we're at a different stage of the company, and we're at a different region, so we might approach it a little differently. Instead of standalone operator side on the LRT, I think we're on the liquid restaking. I think we're approaching with more like aligning ourselves with the LRTs that we're involved with. I mean, like all these names, like Puffer, like Swell, like all these guys, right? The reason for that is, I guess we're a more capitalistic like, operator out there, but we see that like from the B2C user's point of view, like instead of coming to us for like native restaking, like for instance, like if we have a product, people coming to a41.io and like, oh, like we're gonna restake our ETH, we're gonna connect our MetaMask to our webpage and then like do native restaking to us through either, let's say, Vault or whatever. I think users would find it more comfortable and probably like easier to just go to LRTs and restake through LRTs. So I would say that we were focusing more on the user experience side, and we're aligning ourselves more with the liquid restaking through LRTs. If we do go for the native restaking end, I think it's going to be when the regulations around staking and liquid staking, or even liquid restaking, I would say this like 3 to 5 years ahead, but if they get more cleared up, I think we're going to have our product ready and native restaking to be ready as a standalone operators. But until then, I think it doesn't really make sense in terms of ROI perspective to put our resources into like native restaking on our own as a standalone operator.
Yeah, I mean, we do both things. We are happy to work with good LRTs. We have our own native restaking. And I think the way we think about this is there's two different types of capital inflow, right? So native restaking would typically be somebody that we already have a contract with, and then that would be sort of an add-on, right? Whereas LRTs, typically we do not know who brings the capital on the other hand. And for that reason, I would say it just addresses two different types of client relationship, and we're happy to do both of them.
Gotcha. Okay. I guess we touched on this a little bit earlier, Michael, when you were talking about lower quality kind of code. But let's say like legal risk aside, how do you guys decide whether or not to run an AVS, and what would make you decide not to run one?
Sure. So we've made our checklist public. Anybody that's interested in it can look it up. I think so. Let's say there's like a phase change after slashing goes live, right? I mean, in general, we try to only run AVSs anyways that we think we will be okay when slashing goes live, but the risk assessment just has another component that's being looked at an ongoing basis. I think in general terms, so I mentioned we have almost 60 networks, which means that we look at many times more than that. And we have the standardized network onboarding process where we look at, well, how sustainable is that, what's the code quality, and so on, right? And then if we were to specifically extend that to AVSs, one factor might be what I mentioned before, right? Key management should be super solid, right? Even before that, the code should be open source, right? We also, as a rule, build from source. We don't run Docker images without knowing exactly what's behind it, right? Yeah, and then once slashing goes live, the other big thing is correlated risks. So then we have a basket of LRTs, and we have to make sure that we understand the way these risks correlate. We have a paper on that as well. We kind of approach that with a Markov chain Monte Carlo model. But then again, this is something that needs data, which is not there yet. So we expect the usefulness of that to increase as time passes, and this is something that we'll put into practice as soon as we feel that it has sufficient practical use.
I mean, okay. So when the course one issued, they always announce it through Twitter and stuff. We always enjoy like checking whether our checklist kind of like vibes with the tier 0 like validators. I guess like on that side, I think we're almost like very similar. If I have to add more points to what Michael said, I think we're going to add more angle from commercial point of view when we look at AVSs in the future. What I mean by that is, would the AVSs that we've onboarded, would they make enough revenue so that they could actually like contribute to the yields, or would they be able to live up to the expectations that people restake? It would be like a huge factor that we're going to start covering in, and see if that like AVS business model makes sense. And also we will look at a lot of the numbers, revenue-wise. Would they be able to give like the promise, the 50 bips of like so that they could actually boost up the yield? Would be the one of the major categories we would actually see.
Yeah, on our side as well, it's about revenue at the end of the day. So like once slashing is introduced, like there will probably be some sort of probabilistic approach that is possible. Like you have 0.1% of chance to be slashed, and if you get slashed, maybe you lose 1 ETH, let's say. So at the end of the day, like if you try to smooth this risk over a large period of time, you can estimate that on average you will lose a specific amount of ETH given enough time. And then like you just match it with the rewards, and if the rewards are higher, then it makes sense to opt in, right? So I guess we'll probably use some sort of framework like this, but as long as slashing is not like well defined, I guess it doesn't. Yeah, it's hard to know which one we will rule out.
Gotcha. So obviously, restaking has been a very hot narrative recently. A lot of retail interest within restaking. I think when we started off, I was saying operators are probably the least appreciated actor in the space, and likely one of the most important. Maybe John, you can kick it off. But what do you think is the least understood thing about running an operator that most retail users don't understand?
Oh, I could go on and on. I guess it's quite interesting to see, even though a lot of the retails and a lot of people are buying POS network tokens, they're not really like familiar with the role of validator. So when I go to conferences, I mean, like this year EthCC is a little bit peculiar because we see so many restaking, like themed events. But even during Denver, when people ask me, so what do you do? And I tell them, oh, I run a validator, and they're like, what is validator? I'm like, do you hold ETH and Solana? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. So where should we start from? So I guess there's a basic understanding of the role of the validator in the network is probably one of the least understood in the community, I would say. And another thing is, as I mentioned, I think when it comes down to communicating with the core team, I guess it's more of a APAC related or like a regional specific, but like I don't think people do take into account too much of the geo distribution. So what I mean by that is geographical diversity. Even though a lot of people talk about decentralization, they don't really consider geographical diversity when they're actually thinking about the node distribution. So they don't really appreciate, I wouldn't go that far, but like I would say they don't really think about or consider of the geographical diversity when they're choosing operator sets. I think it's slowly changing. A lot of the founders are not really familiar with that idea. And also, I do agree to a certain degree that if your network is like close to like BFT mechanism, like you don't want that latency of the APAC. So like we sometimes move our nodes to Europe. So I would say geographical diversity is also widely like overlooked aspect of running an operator. So those two will be the top two, but give me 24 hours, I can go on and on.
Sebastien, what about you?
I think, yeah, I think there is a part of like research that is maybe not well understood, like what happens under the hood. Like, sure, like we operate and just like spin up nodes, and like at some level you can just see it as an infra pure work that could be like just running Web2 servers or whatever. But there is actually like stake in the game. So like the risk immediately translates to money you lose or your customers lose. And so the research that goes behind the risk modeling and all, and like really understanding the failure modes and how to like mitigate them, I think is maybe not well seen from the outside, because from the outside you just look at the stake button and you have some APY and yeah.
Yeah, I agree with this. I mean, I think generally there's a prevailing opinion that node operators are unsophisticated actors. And I would say that's more of a platonic ideal than anything that's reflected in reality, right? And I think that some networks are quite upfront about that as well, right? So say if you run a Solana node, well, and you propose a block, you definitely get kicked out of a data center at least once, because people think you are being DDoSed, right? If you want to have very good performance, you might want to be in certain geographies, right? I mean, on Ethereum, there's something called timing games. where you need to be strategic about how you solicit or get header requests. And that's just an exercise in network optimization, hardware, okay, and data analysis. So it's actually but not so trivial. On the topic of latency, we also have to admit that I have to bounce quite soon. Because I have another panel in 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, I think we can wrap things up soon then, but I do want to ask one closing question, I guess. It's like, what keeps you up at night? What is running operators, running this core infrastructure, what keeps you up at night? I mean, Michael, you can kick things off.
Yeah, so with AVSs, I mean, we had a moment at the beginning where we thought of, well, this is very new. Should we look at this a little bit more relaxed than we would do at an L1, right? And this would have kept us up at night because it would have led to us taking risks that we are not comfortable with, right? Now we are not doing that, and for that reason, I think we do sleep pretty well. But in terms of what keeps people up at night, well, occasionally engineers get woken up if they're on call, and there's some kind of alarm, right? So not as much as John over in Korea. But yeah, I mean, in general, I think we feel good about the handle we have on risk, so we are quite relaxed.
Mine is a long list. Well, I'm a BD founder, so what keeps me awake at the night would be our my imagination that our DevOps getting killed by like a car accident and stuff like that. That's one. Two is so it's a little bit more like realistic concern. I think Mike briefly touched upon it, but like a lot of the times, node operators at certain scale or like at scale validators needs to know a lot of stuff that is actually beyond our responsibilities. For example, like Michael mentioned about timing game, we have to be at least like knowledgeable, like minimum in terms of like MEV, like or like there are a lot of stuff that we need to be like so aware of, like that is not like directly related to our business. So as a founder or CEO, it's like, do I understand enough about these topics? Can I, like, is it okay for me to sleep like 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours good sleep when like every competitor or like even like top like validators, they have like such a huge research team and they're like going, like advancing so fast. Do we have enough time to like rest and stuff like that? Because it's a very tiring business, validator businesses. And at the same time, you have to like always like punch forward. So it's like a very difficult trade-off that we always face.
So for me, the research side is more something in the background that can be done during the day, hopefully. So at night, yeah, I'm more worried, let's say, about or woken up by yeah, hardware failure or like kind of like classic operational stuff. But I sleep quite well, I think. I mean, like, the blockchains are quite, I think there's water leaking. Let's liquid restaking. Like, so I think like with maturity and all, like, I mean, like protocol maturity, like for instance on Ethereum, like there is like a well set known of a consensus client, and they get like very like known failure modes, and it's quite easy to, well, with time it's quite easy to manage them and handle them well. So yeah, I think that what keeps me up at night is things that are not yet mature, and so EigenLayer right now has no like big risk, so it's okay-ish. But yeah, I expect that once it goes live, we'll have like a ramp-up time, yeah, and short nights.
Nice.
Dude, that happening at my data center would be my fucking
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, hey, thanks everyone. Out of respect for Michael's time, I know you got to run out of here, but the rest of us will be over here by the side if you want to ask anyone, maybe John and Sebastien, any questions about operators and validators. And other than that, thanks for everyone coming. Oh, actually, go for it. We'll sit back down. Yeah.
should I call Alex and Artemi and like tell them to like shut their notes? I think it's kind of natural. Like okay, I guess we all have different opinions, right? I think it's kind of natural for a lot of the restakers to choose a name that they're familiar with. So a lot of the times, validated business becomes a branding game. So when you come to APAC, I don't want to say it, but like, you know, I guess we're more famous than like P2P, right? Whereas when we go to Europe or when we go to America, we're nobody. So essentially, like if you're staking or restaking, and you see the name that you're familiar with, and you know that there are big validators, and you know that restaking is a quite novel concept, so a lot of people feel that they're more safe with the bigger names. I think that's one of the reasons why that is happening. Also, from the, I'm not going to specifically talk about the Eigen side, but if you're LRT, the reason why they're trying to select and like, you know, curate the operator sets is because of the communication cost that is involved in operator sets. So if they go like too permissionless, when they have to do something with the operators, the communication cost is so high, so they tend to like set their operator sets numbers to like 5 to 7, so that they could actually like ping them and then like, hey, can you do this for us? Can you do this? And can you do that? And then like things will be done within like 30 minutes or 1 hour, so that it doesn't cause any fears among the users who are actually using those restaking protocols or LRTs, is quite essential at this stage. So I think it will get better as the time goes. But for now, because it is such a novel concept for a lot of the users, that's one of the reasons why that is happening. And also, like, if they feel more comfortable with the name, and also, like, when people, let's say you're late to the game, and you're trying to restake, and you see all the order, like, with stake asset sizes, you just go naturally with the largest ones to feel more safe, which is, I don't know, like, to me, it's counterintuitive, but, like, it is how it is, I think.
I think it can be like fixed in a way with like the slashing mechanisms that are put in place. Like for instance, you could imagine like having correlated penalties if something goes wrong. And so like if the slashing mechanisms are well defined, I think in the long run, diversity will emerge because like once a big entity that manages 90% of everything is down, and gets like massive slashes, well, of course, like folks will like probably like step back and like try to spread. I hope there won't be like such massive events, but I think like yeah, with time and like penalties coming, I think the landscape will evolve. Like yeah.
And although I am a humble moderator, I think if I could chime in and answer as well, I think it is a problem, but I don't know if it's necessarily an operator's, like the operator community's responsibility to fix it. I think, you know, as John brought up, there's one, just the simple like EigenLayer UX solution on like how do you make sure people are being able to allocate properly and not incentivized, just go with the first name on the list. And then on the AVS side as well, making sure that they're properly incentivizing through however they go about their you know, payments process to make sure that they're properly incentivizing a solid distribution of operators as well.
If a lot of people share the same concern, you can always choose A41 instead of P2P. I mean, Alex and Artemis are not here, so.
Any other questions? Awesome. All right. Hey, like I said, we'll all still be here. Thank you.